This week, we'll be diving into one of the most fascinating poltergeist cases ever recorded, that of Joasia Gajewski, who, beginning at 13 years old and lasting for the next 7 years, was plagued with poltergeist activity. This case, though easily one of the most well-documented and widely witnessed accounts in history, was nearly lost to obscurity, if not for the dedication and efforts of Joel Stern, who we were lucky enough to have the privilege of sitting down with and interviewing. Hope you enjoy. I didn't see you there.
It all started early this morning.
From hunting ghosts to Bigfoot, UFOs, cryptids, true crime, paranormal, and more.
I've always wanted to see a UFO.
Oh, I was researching for your entertainment.
That's Bigfoot's guy.
He basically wrote the book on Monarch.
We aren't really comedians.
What if Buddha did cocaine?
The Addams Family on meth. This is the Black Cat Report.
See you on the other side. And joining us today is Joel Stern. Joel, how are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you.
Awesome, man. Well, need to start off right away by just saying thank you for coming on the show, for bringing this case to us. You had reached out to the Black Cat Report email in, I believe it was late April, early May, which it kind of felt like it was a birthday present for me when your email came to our inbox, where you were like, "Hey, I've been working on this case as a translator. You pursued it for so many years, and you gave me a beautiful care package of information and inspiration to reach back out to you. And you asked, would you like to have this on the show to summarize?" The second I looked into it, I fell in love. I immediately asked you at that time. I was like, okay, we want you on for either the 100th episode or a 2-year anniversary. Do either of these dates work for you? and thank you. Thank you for being here for our 2-year anniversary.
Thank you, seriously.
Well, I'm glad that you found the case to be so interesting, and I'm honored to be your guest tonight.
Thank you. So if we could start off with, how did this case land in your hands, and what is the Elusive Force?
Well, how do I start? I was working as a translator at the State Department in Washington, D.C. I specialized in Slavic languages, which includes, of course, Polish, Russian, Ukrainian, Czech, and so forth. And through my knowledge of languages, I managed to make the acquaintance of a Polish couple in Northern Virginia. They emigrated in the mid-'80s from Poland to Warsaw. The husband was a bioenergy therapist, and the wife was a journalist. Her name was Margaret in English. Margaret introduced me to this case by the Elusive Force by giving me this book. I believe it was in the fall or early winter of 1988. And she said that there was an American publisher who might be interested in bringing this book out, and they were looking for a translator. And if I were interested in the subject, perhaps I could, have my translation published.
Yeah.
So I read the book, and I found it totally fascinating, and I thought it was worthy of publication for various reasons, which we'll, go into later. Unfortunately, the woman's promise regarding a potential publisher turned out to be false, but I won't go into that unpleasant aspect of the whole matter. Suffice it to say that I did translate the book starting December of 88 or January 89, and that took me exactly 7 or 8 months to complete. The case involves a teenage girl named Joasia Gajewski, who lived in Silesia, which is an area in southern Poland near the Czech border. There was a violent outbreak of poltergeist activity in April of 1983. It came quite unexpectedly to the girl herself and her family, and of course the neighbors living in the apartment building where they resided.
Yeah.
After I finished translating the book in the summer of '89, I got in touch with the co-authors, Anna Oszczycka, who's a journalist, and her husband, also a well-known journalist in Warsaw, Marek Romuszko, and since I knew Polish, that facilitated our acquaintance, our contacts. They invited me to go to Poland and meet them and visit the girl herself, which I did in October of 1989. They drove me from Warsaw to the town of Chelaj, which is a small settlement outside a larger town of Sosnowiec. And that's how I met the subject of the book, Joasia Gajewski.
I want to get into the meeting of her a little bit later.
Sure.
This book, it holds no punches. First 6 pages, if you are not hooked, you're going to hate the entire thing. Don't buy it. Don't even bother. I guarantee you. Just put it down. If you are not absolutely hooked the first 6 pages in, and I'm not trying to sell this here, I'm trying to point out, like, most books around paranormal events, to paint very broad strokes, they, explain the fact that the sheriff in town grew up next to this guy named Andy, and he really loved to bake bread. But anyways, his mother did this, and it spends forever slowly painting every single brush stroke of a scene before it paints the main characters, right?
Yeah.
Holy shit. That is not what happens here. You have immediate activity. You have 10, 15 witnesses if you want to go from the fact that it's the family, large, decent-sized family, that's all sleeping at the house when things kick off. Then it goes into the upstairs neighbors getting involved and them seeing it.
Mm-hmm.
Then it gets to officials from the area, they getting involved. Then the mayor's assistant gets involved. And that's in the first 6 pages. Every single one of these folks, for the most part, are witnessing this and having their preconceived notions flipped on their head. So Joel, I guess to kind of to dangle a cherry in front of everyone's face for the folks that haven't seen it, if you could get into how did this kick off? What type of poltergeist experiences, situations took place that really kicked in the front door?
Well, it was during the Easter holidays, April 1983. There was really no inkling that such an incredible phenomenon would occur. Joasia was 13 at the time, a 6th grade student, unremarkable in any way. She was not dabbling in sorcery, not interested in paranormal subjects at all, just an ordinary teenage girl, ordinary Polish family. The father was a plumber, the mother was a telephone operator, and they in a very modest existence. Remember, this was during martial law in Poland, and living conditions were very spartan, difficult for the population. That's just to set the scene. Okay, so basically, overnight, these violent kinetic effects started to occur. Flying glassware, mirrors being smashed, tremendous cacophony of exploding objects. It was just indescribable bedlam. And the neighbors, of course, were alarmed by this commotion, and they thought that the Gajewski family was in a drunken brawl or something.
Yeah.
They came down and saw that these kinetic effects are actually happening, and eventually the town authorities and the police were alerted to this problem.
Mm-hmm.
They came, and after some initial skepticism, they realized that these phenomena were in fact real and posed a danger to the family. The first couple chapters in the book describe the reactions of the community to these events, that Joasia was regarded with superstitious fear and that she might be, demonically possessed in some way, but
yeah.
A priest was summoned at one point to exorcise their apartment, but apparently it did no good since these phenomena continued with unabated violence. A few initial studies were conducted in the belief that the building might have some kind of construction defect or might be on top of some water course that were, causing settling of the walls.
I have to crack up at that.
Well, that was the initial hypothesis. That's what the authorities thought.
I gotta stop you right there. Because
yes,
at this build-up in this situation, so the first main remembered / recorded event, Grandpa sleeping on the couch.
Right.
And Joasia, she's there. Everybody's sleeping there. It's a multi-day kind of like a traditional ceremony of like Easter weekend, right? Or the Easter holiday.
Right.
And a tapestry, right, falls off of the wall.
Well, it was kind of like a straw mat, one of these decorative, like folk art. I don't know exactly what it looked like, but there was a lot of folk art in Poland. So some kind of straw, thing hanging on the wall,
Yeah, just like a very folk art style, like fiber, kind of like artwork that's hanging on the wall, very traditional. And this thing falls onto one of the sleeping individuals' faces. They wake up, they're like, what the
The
heck?
grandfather, yeah, and he thought she was playing a prank.
Yeah,
you know.
he's like, what the heck? Why would you, like, and that's totally a little kid thing. You throw a towel or a washcloth on somebody's head and you're like, ah, ha, 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 and run out of the room. And grandfather's like, what the heck? Notices that Joasia, she's asleep, and he's like, oh, that's weird. Maybe it just fell down. A totally natural assumption, right? He goes to grab it, and it's almost comical how it starts, at least the way I read it, in the theater of my mind, right? He goes to grab this tapestry that fell on his face, and it stands up. Like, so picture the rug from the Aladdin. It stands up and is almost kind of like dancing, like someone's like manipulating it in front of him, and he just kind of is like, WTF? He's just like, what is going on right now? Because anybody at that point would be like, maybe I didn't open my eyes. Maybe I'm still dreaming. I'm looking at a dancing rug in front of me, or a dancing, piece of fiber in front of me. And so the grandpa, which, like, bless his heart, he has a later situation with matches that are flying around. This guy is constantly just, he's getting the worst of it in terms of stress. But I mean, he has like strike anywhere matches that he's like running around the house trying to be like, oh no, trying to stop fires from starting. But then stuff, how can I put this? And I'm interjecting here around the person that comes in for geological reasons, because they're like, well, maybe it's under underground waterway. No. Stuff starts flying off the walls. Like metal objects, stoneware objects, glass, flying off the walls, and just anywhere that it could have been stationary, and smashing into surfaces to the point that you have, picture a Michael Bay action film with explosions happening and the glass flying everywhere. Like, that's the kind of things that's happening with like impacts around the room. The whole family wakes up, right? And this is at that point. Right, this is late at night, 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. It's very late at night. The upstairs neighbors, more or less, like, what the hell is going on downstairs? Like any upstairs neighbor would be at that point. They're like, literally, what is going on? Is this like you said, a drunken quarrel that's happening? And there's a note made in there, which is, that wasn't typical for the family. They were very mild-mannered, very quiet, very respectful within the apartment community right there. So they were just like, what the, again, another WTF moment, like, what the fuck is going on right now? But then the family comes upstairs like a bunch of refugees popping up at the door, which at this point they are more or less paranormal refugees. And they're like, can we please come in your house? Right? So like, how horrifying is that situation where you're hearing your downstairs neighbors, all hell's breaking loose. You hear it, the smashing, the crashing, all this terrible shit going on. People are probably screaming. You have little kids in the room. And then they show up at your door looking like they've seen a ghost, because more or less they did everything but, right? And they're like, can we please come inside for safety?
Yeah.
Like, what kind of weird shit is that? The upstairs neighbor, he then goes downstairs. He still thinks it's a hoax. He still thinks it's a prank. He's like, or they're trying to cover for some kind of domestic, whatever the heck's. I mean, nobody's first thought is there's a poltergeist. Even the family who is experiencing it, it's not a poltergeist situation. They're just like, we don't know. We just need to get away, He goes in. He's the one standing in the doorway, right? So he's facing into the apartment. Family behind him, right? They open up the door. He steps in. He starts seeing shit flying around while the family is behind him.
Well, let me correct you.
Please.
Me correct you. He doesn't actually see the objects flying because they're hurtling at such a fantastic speed that he sees them smash into the wall.
Wow.
But they're moving at such an incredible velocity.
Yeah.
That's typical of violent poltergeist outbreaks.
Could you get into that a little bit? Because that's something that blew my mind reading this book, was like, you're not seeing it.
Generally not. I mean, there were a few exceptions that are mentioned here and there throughout the book. But in most cases, in this particular instance, I'm not going to say make a generalization about all poltergeist cases.
Yeah.
But in this particular instance, objects tended to fly with such velocity that they appeared to be a blur. You couldn't actually see them move. The only thing you would hear was the crash of their collision on the wall or some solid object. And the sound actually was often disproportionate to the size of the object. For example, a bottle might be flying and crashing from the kitchen and flying into the living room wall, but it wouldn't sound like the crash of an ordinary bottle. It would sound like an exploding television tube.
Yeah.
It was so loud. So that's characteristic of this particular case. So I just had to interject there for a moment.
Please. Thank you. Yeah.
The neighbors and, the officials often didn't see the flying objects per se, but only the results of the destruction. The shattered glass falling down the wall. That's, a very particular aspect of this phenomenon that may have bearing on its explanation,
That had to be very, for the people seeing it, had to be very scary to not even know the cause of these things, but see it and hear it louder than possible going into this room, honestly. Just seeing, not seeing it, but then just hearing it and maybe even feeling the explosions of it, while the family is gone. Had to be some really scary moments for these people. And then, not having an explanation is the biggest thing, because they're hearing these huge explosions. And I mean, for me, if I walked in that situation, I'd be like, well, I think I'm going to go home. See ya.
Well, many of the neighbors were frightened to death. Joasia's schoolmates who you used to visit her were obviously shocked and concerned for her welfare. Many of them are eyewitnesses and were themselves struck by flying objects.
Ooh.
So this is no joke. It may sound funny.
Yeah.
But it had a very when the girl's emotional well-being and her progress in school, obviously.
And you mentioned that they kind of, her classmates and everybody kind of looked on her a different way. I know that Poland in 1980s was very Roman Catholic, very, very high zeal in that area. It still is.
It's very traditional. I mean, obviously things have changed in 40 years, but a large portion of the Polish, countryside is very conservative. And so back in the 1980s, this was even more true.
Yeah. And how did that, I know you're talking about her, and I don't know if I'm jumping ahead too much, Gil, into this, but how did that,
go ahead. Go ahead.
Affect her a lot? How did they start treating her? People outside of this, people who weren't even, just didn't see it or didn't hear anything going on, but they heard of it and heard of the family. How did they start treating her, and how did they, how did that affect her as well? Because I'm sure it's not just the poltergeist activity that was affecting her.
Well, at first they treated her with superstition. They were people were fearful. They were curious. They would gather outside the family's apartment and knock on the door and call her a witch, or obviously this had a very traumatic effect on her. Her teachers, fortunately, were much more tolerant, and they explained to her classmates that these events had nothing to do with demonic forces, that they were, certainly unusual. But Joasia was not deliberately trying to harm people, and that she herself was often the victim of these phenomena, these, destructive effects. So eventually she came to be more accepted. She was a very pleasant, likable person. I met her, and I had a very good impression of her as a human being. So, initially the reaction was very fearful, but I think she eventually came to be accepted, as a decent person who was plagued by some bizarre phenomenon that, is still unexplainable.
There's so many things. Like When I say so much stuff happened within the first like 6 pages, I'm not joking, and that doesn't stop for the rest of the book. So if we're hesitating or if we're hopping around, it's because it's just like, we've got Joel here. We can ask him all the questions in the world. How do we ask questions in such a way that he's literally not just reading the book to us and annotating it?
Yeah.
Well, the book is only about 170 pages or so.
Yes.
But it's densely packed.
Yes.
There's no fluff.
No.
It's like a granola bar. It's dense.
That's
every page. Every page has a nut to crack.
It's a granola bar with only chocolate chips. It's the perfect granola bar.
Well, whatever. So, there's food for thought on every page. That's what I like about the book. It's not sensationalist. It's sober. No. It's serious.
Yeah.
It's journalistic though. This is not a scientific treatise that we're talking about. Statistics and dry prose. It's fascinating, but not exaggerated, in my opinion. Although I would not have undertaken this project if I thought it was, frivolous and sensationalistic. Far from that.
Yeah, and this is honestly, it's the juxtaposition between those efforts, those intents, those decisions, right? And the reality of what's delivered in this case, because it is journalistic. It is coming at it from a more scientific approach. It is critical in the ways that I feel like it should be critical, and it's still telling you some wild shit that happened. I mean, like, has the numbers been given or like racked up around an estimated number of witnesses over time to these poltergeist events?
Well, there's not an exact number. I can only tell you that an unusual aspect of this case is that it lasted for 7 years, from 1983 and 1990.
It's insane.
Which is not typical poltergeist activity. Most such cases last maybe a few months or a year.
Yeah.
So in its duration, this particular phenomenon stands out.
Yeah.
And also, the girl, Joasia, was studied by several interdisciplinary teams of specialists over a period of 40 months, which also makes the case unique. I'm not aware of any other such case that was studied over a long period of time by specialists in numerous disciplines such as psychology, medicine, biophysics, metallurgy, and what have you. So, in answer to your question, there were numerous eyewitnesses in various locations. I'm talking about classmates, the specialists who studied her, police officials, municipal authorities, doctors and nurses at a sanitarium where she stayed for a month or so.
Yeah.
So it's well documented.
Would it be an exaggeration to say that it easily, in my mind, I feel like I could go through and start highlighting names in the book. It has to have passed over 100. Like, I would be shocked if over the 7 years there wasn't at least close to, if not over, 100 individual witnesses to these different events.
Well, again, I'm not going to
fair.
specify any figure, but I'm just saying numerous eyewitnesses and eyewitnesses who are credible.
It's more than 10.
Far more than a dozen. Or it's their credibility that argues for the existence of these phenomena.
Exactly, because we get to points in there's the initial kind of scientific tests, right? And it kind of bounces back and forth between a few different doctors, a few different scientists. Do you mind kind of elaborating a little bit on that? Because again, this lasts for 7 years. That is, in the world of the paranormal, you're lucky if something lasts for 7 seconds or 7 minutes. 7 years is insane. This is unheard of, right? So there's time to do these scientific tests. And do you mind kind of elaborating a little bit on some of the tests that take place?
Oh, well, that's a very complicated matter. The last 2 chapters of the book, the appendices, go into that in considerable detail. Not being a scientist or a paranormal researcher myself, I would not claim to be understand the complex, multifaceted approach used by these scientists. But all I can say at this point that she was studied intensively under controlled laboratory conditions. Hundreds of medical exams and experiments were performed, which, according to the authors of the book, ruled out any possibility of a hoax on her part. Which is not to say that the scientists, the researchers who studied the case were unanimous in their judgment. They weren't.
Yeah.
We still have no unanimity among the paranormal community regarding the nature of poltergeist activity or many other paranormal events for that matter. Is there one thing I want to concentrate on? Well, spoon bending, for example,
Yes.
She bent 2 spoons for me. I visited her, I think I mentioned, in 1989 and 1990. And on each occasion, she bent a spoon right before my eyes by rubbing it with 1 or 2 fingers
You
for a
saw
couple
this.
of minutes. Oh, yeah. I have these spoons. I kept them as souvenirs.
You have them.
Didn't I send you pictures? Or the pictures appeared in one of the articles that I sent you?
No, I don't think I saw them.
Oh, I have the 2 spoons. Yeah, they're twisted like pretzels.
Wow.
The strongest man in the world could not bend a spoon in that way using 1 or 2 fingers.
Wow.
I defy anybody to do that. I don't care what people say about Uri Geller.
Yeah.
Whether he was genuine or not, that's another matter.
Yeah.
I have these spoons. I saw her rub them with 1 or 2 fingers for a couple minutes. They're twisted like pretzels. Please explain to me how a teenage girl could have done that.
Yeah.
Also, not only spoons, but other objects, massive steel communication cables. I saw them. They're bent like bows. I could not. I tried unbending this thing. I mean, I could not move it 1 millimeter. It was impossible.
There's a photo later in the book of that cable.
Yes, and then that's the only one. There were others.
Yeah.
And so hundreds of these tests were performed in the Metallurgical Welding Technology Institute.
Yeah.
And she was able to perform successfully many of these experiments. Not on every occasion.
Yeah.
Joasia was not a robot. Her health varied, her mood varied, but she was able to perform enough of these experiments to convince the researchers that she had these phenomenal abilities. Now, Amazing Randy, I get this reaction all the time, and when I mention this case. Well, look, Amazing Randy and other stage magicians can do the same thing. Well, I'd like to see Amazing Randy bend a massive communication cable using 1 finger. Let him do it, or anyone else. Let anyone else try it.
Yeah.
This is the challenge for all of you out there.
Yeah, for real. For the next Strongman competition, we're coming up. We're a few weeks away at the release of this episode from the Olympics, right? This is their challenge. These cables, to give you an idea, so go out in your front yard, wherever the heck you're at, go out in your front yard and look at how thick the telephone and the internet cable is hanging from the telephone pole. Right? So, go look at that and imagine that it was stiff and you're just bending it into a crazy pretzel. Now, imagine a 13-year-old doing that. Yeah, okay.
With her finger, right? With her finger? Just her finger?
Well, I wasn't present at the time she bent this cable or other similar objects.
Yeah.
But she did not use any vice or any other mechanical means. So tell me how a 13-year-old girl was able to do something like that. And that's not the only such incident described in the book. I mean, if you remember, if you remember the part, chapter room 309, where she stayed at the sanitarium.
Yeah, with the faucet.
And she destroyed the sink within 20 seconds. She ripped it out of the wall and bent the faucets.
Wow.
What did she bring, plumbing equipment with her?
Yeah.
That's not something they allowed in there, I don't think.
I'm gonna say, either she's Popeye and we need to cut off her supply of spinach or something, because let's put it this way. And there's photos. That's another thing I want to bring up. Pretty much all these things that we're talking about, either the repercussions and the after effects lead up to them. There's a lot of photos in this book, which honestly makes it so awesome, because it's not just, hey, picture a spoon. It's like, no, here's the spoon. Hey, picture a giant communications cable. No. Here's the cable, because there were so many months and years that went by. These were all documented. But I just want to point this out, something real quick. If this is a parlor trick, which I don't think it is, but if it was a parlor trick, this girl could single-handedly make billions of dollars by going into any weld shop, any metallurgist facility, any production facility, showing them the simple trick that she learned at home. Like, in 3 easy steps with cinnamon, you can bend this cable that requires all of this professional equipment. Like, if she was faking it, holy shit, she should quit being a con, and she should just come out and educate the world in this incredible skill that she's hiding.
Well, Gil, let me point something out to you that
please.
The metallurgical studies that were done on the objects that she managed to bend, twist into grotesque shapes, their structure was not the same. The crystalline structure of these objects was not the same as in objects that were bent by mechanical means, like using a vise, for example. That's a very technical aspect which I'm not qualified to discuss, but there is a definite distinction in the atomic bonds and crystalline structure of objects bent psychokinetically and objects bent through traditional mechanical means. So it's not just the bending of the object in itself, but how it affects their physical makeup. And that's one fascinating aspect of the of the case.
Yeah, that's providing some further evidence that she didn't just bring the metal bender, a wrench or something in there that she could just move this thing with, providing further evidence that it was bent by, in a way, human means, or just like the atoms around it maybe moved instead of that it was bent by, mechanical means.
One thought occurs to me that some researchers have ascribed poltergeist cases to entities, like ghosts or malicious spirits that for some unknown reason decide to plague an individual.
Yeah.
Well, my reply to that is as follows. Did this entity have the power to bend communication cables? Did he give her telepathic powers? That she could read minds or, pass all these telepathy tests? I don't think so.
Yeah.
It almost seems to me like it seems symbiotic. Like it almost, you see the feeder fish that attach to the outside of like a whale's mouth or a shark's mouth. This is kind of like traveling through the ocean. And you have, with every one of these large sea creatures, you and even the smaller ones, but the large ones, it's very obvious, right? You have these large great white sharks, and you have like 15, 16 different kinds of little fish, right, and different creatures that are just floating to or attached to that shark wherever the hell it goes, and whatever the hell it's doing, they are attached to it. They're cruising with it, and it's like a small ecosystem that's just kind of moving through, the deep. And these cases of the poltergeist cases, and Joasia's case, to me, like it stands out so much because it just feels like it becomes symbiotic.
Well, that raises a lot of interesting questions among many others.
Yeah.
To ascribe a poltergeist to, a poltergeist activity to some entity. Why does such entities affect some people rather than others? I mean, there's something about the brain or the chemical composition of the body that attracts these entities. I mean, often such cases occur among teenage girls, and there's a hypothesis that their hormonal changes during puberty in interaction with turbulent emotional states somehow generate these bizarre kinetic effects. But again, why than others.
Yeah.
All teenagers go through puberty. Many have turbulent lives, but they don't all suffer from poltergeist manifestations. So, we're far from an explanation. Why Joasia? Was there something unusual about her? That's one of the hypotheses discussed in the appendix of the book, that she may have had a certain configuration of her cerebral hemispheres that was conducive to generate these effects. But again, how do you prove something like that? You can't, operate on her brain to see at the cellular level.
Yeah.
I mean, that would kill the poor girl.
Yeah.
So you bring up many issues.
There were studies that were done, during those 7 years, right, or the 40 months of scientific studies, kind of bouncing back and forth, where they did find she did have anomalies with things like body temperature, with her cerebral synapses firing, in the sense that it looked like she was having a seizure while she was wide the hell awake and cognizant and talking and, processing everything in the room. But all of a sudden, at certain moments, her brain would pop off, in the sense, in a light under the MRI, right, kind of a thing. It would look like seizure-ish type things were happening internally while she was totally fine, right?
Well, there was some similarities found with in the functioning of her brain with epileptic state, although she did not have epilepsy per se.
Yeah.
But there were certain similar patterns, and she did have certain hormonal abnormalities in her dopamine level, and there were certain energy foci, in her fingers and toes that displayed concentrations of energy. And so there were anomalies, but how do you connect those anomalies with all these physical effects around her? And they continued long after puberty. She was 20 years old eventually when these phenomena eventually stopped. So why did they continue so long? Again, we can only ask questions. At this point, we don't have the techniques or the equipment for arriving at a definite explanation. We just don't have it. We don't have the knowledge.
Yeah, we don't really have the knowledge of if this is multidimensional or anything like that. I know that's a very paranormal thing to think of, and especially the way that you talk about in the story. In the book, is that all the dishes were flying around at such high speeds and exploding, on the wall, like they were completely different objects. And when I first heard that, I think something is in another dimension, like, not saying I completely believe, in multiple dimensions. There probably are some of that. But when I think of that, it's at such a high speed that it goes into somewhere else. Is what I was thinking when that was happening, and then just kind of appears back into it. 'Cause when I think about like paranormal, I think of coming from a seemingly other dimension. I know this is kind of going really deep into it, but I like to do that when I think about paranormal things. And you talk about her having, these other worldly things happen to her. She can bend this stuff. That's kind of what Gil talks about, the whale shark, and having things attached onto it being a symbiotic relationship. And maybe that's, in my thinking about it, is what it could be, something symbiotic that allows her to do these things. I don't know. I'm just kind of riffing here a little bit, trying to put my own thoughts together around it.
Well, you raised this interesting point about multidimensional universe. Actually, that's my own view.
Oh, okay.
We're limited by our 5 senses. But as we know, in the example of such creatures as bats, whales, dolphins, cats, what have you, their sensory apparatus is quite different. They can perceive and react to things that are invisible or inaudible to the average human being who doesn't have those, finely tuned senses. I completely agree with that. There's nothing paranormal in that. That's a scientific fact,
Yeah.
Other creatures have different sensory apparatus. They can perceive things differently. So I'm in complete agreement with that. Western science does not have the understanding at this point at least, to account for these types of phenomena. But other cultures, for example, I'm thinking of Indian culture, yoga, or, Tibetan Buddhism, such phenomena may be explainable in their tradition,
Yeah.
They have a different concept of energy. So to say that something can't be measured scientifically doesn't mean that it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
It just means we, at our present stage of not look at X-rays, for example, late 1890s, before Wilhelm Röntgen discovered, existence of X-rays, he would have been labeled delusional or put in an insane asylum for claiming that invisible rays exist and can be used for medicinal purposes.
Yeah.
And now it's taken for granted,
Yeah.
And that's just one out of countless examples. Maybe one day in the remote future we'll have a better grasp of this, type of activity. But right now it's still very hypothetical.
Yeah, we can't measure it.
There's the fact that the majority of the world, for the majority of history, has all tried to explain this. It's been the exception, not the rule, to acknowledge that there's a, define it how you will, not the five senses world that's operating around us. A majority. I feel very comfortable saying that.
Well, that's the essential view of shamanism, in which I'm a passionate believer. That's the oldest religion of mankind, and I think it has a lot of validity.
Yeah.
The idea of a spirit dwelling, world full of spirits. Every object has a form of energy, in one vibrational level or another. And I believe in that.
Yeah.
And we don't perceive it because of our limited, sensory apparatus, but I think it has a great deal of explanatory value.
There was an episode that we did recently called The Demons of War. And it was a book that I got on demons throughout the world, throughout history. And as I was flipping through, it's a fascinating book. I'll send you the information later if you want.
Please, I'd like to investigate it.
Hands down, one of the best researched books I've ever laid my hands on. This author, Jesus Christ, knocks it out of the park 15 times over. But as I was thumbing through the book, just kind of sitting outside, drinking a coffee, just chain smoking, just kind of flipping through and just reading random little things, I noticed a pattern start to develop. And it was demons that all sound vaguely similar, only appearing on battlefields during war. That's it. Not before, not after, pretty much just during. And they were separated by enough time, space, and culture that it's undeniable, in my mind, that, and based off of the descriptions, right, if this was a suspect running through town committing the same crime over and over again, the police would guarantee you, this is the same guy that did it, right? They're all explaining the same goddamn thing. You really don't have to go far out on a limb to be so it's a skinny, bat-like looking demonic creature that flies down and drinks the blood of people on the battlefields and rips their souls out just during battle. In Greek culture, Malaysian culture, cultures that are in the Amazon, just cultures in Africa. It's just wait, what? Why are they all explaining the same goddamn thing? And but the point of all this is that during that episode and kind of during the research leading up to it, I started to view this extrasensory world, right, as an ecosystem. And suddenly that clicked for me. Right. So once I kind of took these views around shamanic things or, the entities or any of this outside of the three dimensions that we're used to. Right. And I started viewing them in the perception of an ecosystem. That's, the classic magical phrase, as above, so below. Right. Once I viewed it in that sense, everything made a lot more sense to me immediately. Which is why I view things like the poltergeists, right, or poltergeist incidences as almost a feeder fish, as almost a symbiotic relationship. As, the sharks, when they're 1 week old, 2 weeks old, when they're first born, they don't have feeder fish and all these things attached to them, right? They're not going in there cleaning out their teeth, right? As they as they age, as they reach maturity, they do. And it's totally normal, and it fits into a very complex, well-balanced ecosystem, right? And a lot of times we see animals reacting in the extremes when the ecology gets brought to an extreme, which makes me wonder, when we look at cases like poltergeist situations, has the ecological mix between the reality that we're comfortable with and, to save time, the spiritual reality, has that become imbalanced? Which is something that you hop into kind of like later in the book when you start talking about there was an uptick in Poland of poltergeist cases at this time.
Right, exactly that same period. Yeah, right. That's good that you mentioned that, because, the synchronicity.
Yeah.
Perhaps there was something in the culture or ecological situation in Poland that created this. I hadn't thought of that. That's an excellent point that you brought up. I hadn't thought of that at all. And
one of the things I just Googled, and this is one of the, when you're talking about the ecological factors and things like that, is that in 1981 to 83, there was martial law in Poland.
Yes, I mentioned that. Yeah, very difficult time.
Mm-hmm. Probably helped into the factors of what was going on, and why you said there's a lot of paranormal things going on is because could be attributed to bad things happening, a lot of strife, a lot of, what do they call it? Like, we talk about bad energies in some ways kind of brewing around, and maybe some of that adds into some of the manifestations. People maybe even looking for some of this stuff more than they would have normally before.
Well, if poltergeist activity to some extent is conditioned by emotional upheavals, that's one more or less convincing hypothesis. It's very possible that the emotions, the heated emotions at that time, the distress, the anguish, the fear, may have contributed to this outbreak. Again, how do you measure something like that? It's but it's food for thought.
It had to be hard for her to live through this for 7 years. You talked about 7 years to live through this, and you talk about, honestly, in a way, she had incredible abilities, which is, a lot of people would think, this is amazing that she can do these things, bend, spoons, read people's minds in a general way, and that kind of thing. Amazing abilities, but probably to her, they probably weren't that amazing to have, especially with everything else going on.
Well, again, I can't get into her mind. I only met her twice.
Yeah.
She didn't strike. She wasn't a philosophically sophisticated or an abstract intellectual. She was just an ordinary teenager. So it's hard for me to describe her attitude. I think she was just resigned, more or less. She could not understand these events. She just accepted them and tried to cope with them. Initially, of course, she was shocked and frightened, but I think she eventually came to accept them as part of her life, a part that she couldn't explain, but that was about it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So is there anything that, when you were going through the book and you met them and you talked to them, is there anything that you wanted that's not in the book that you thought you should have added or could have been added to the book to give it something a little more detailed, a little more oriented? Anything like that that when you met them you talked to them?
I'm not quite sure how to answer that question. One thing I regret, well, among others, is that the scientists and the researchers who studied this case were unable to, at the time, to acquire more financing for the research. The Polish scientific community, the government, was not receptive to this type of activity, and they made it very difficult for the researchers to pursue their studies. Otherwise, we might have heard more about this. Peer-reviewed journals could have featured the case.
Yeah.
Look, it took me 34 years to break through, to find the publisher.
Yeah.
So, yes, I have my regrets. I did not have the fame, the connections to bring the case to public attention when it was still, happening. It makes me wonder how many other cases like this occur throughout the world that we never hear of because of language barriers, the wall of apathy surrounding the paranormal. So many wasted opportunities. It's very saddening.
You're hitting close to our heart right now, as Gil is just saying.
You can't see on my end, but I'm literally making the heart symbol with my hand. You and I, we connected when we chatted over the weekend, specifically about that poll.
Look how many cases of reincarnation in India, other South Asian countries. You know, Ian Stevenson, a professor at the University of Virginia, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. He studied
Charlottesville.
These cases in detail, wrote about hundreds. But how many have we not heard of throughout the world?
Yeah.
You know?
To harken back to a phrase I used the other day, but like how many times we've burned the Library of Alexandria.
Right.
You know, we keep doing it over and over again. These cases that are forgotten, ignored, lost, or locked behind something, in my mind, as stupid as a language barrier. And in this day and age, when we have AI updates on every smartphone on the planet that can automatically translate and transcribe more or less within a decent accurate, enough to know what's going on, a decent accuracy, which is getting better every day, there is no excuse anymore. I'm sorry. You know, back in the day, you were working for the State Department. You were doing this for a living, translating multiple Slavic languages, right?
Right.
And the field has changed so much since then. We were talking about that. You were like, you know, I had to do this and I had to do this. And I was sitting there, I was like, I just kind of went to Google Translate and clicked a few things, and a huge gap now. And we don't have an excuse anymore. We need to dig into these cases.
Well, I'm glad that I was able in my own small way to contribute, you know, make a contribution to the field of paranormal research. And I hope other cases such as this, maybe even more spectacular, will come to public attention. Speaking of which, I mentioned this during our conversation, but the authors of the book wrote a sequel in 1994 called Return of the Elusive Force, which deals with an even more incredible case in a Warsaw hospital where a patient was brought in an alcoholic stupor. He wasn't even conscious. He was in coma. And the immediate result of his stay was a tremendous outburst of poltergeist activity. And this continued for several days, you know, while he was still in a coma, and stopped when he died. You know, so this guy wasn't even conscious. How do you account for that? Was his mind or was his body possessed by an entity for these few days? Or was something in his brain interacting with his physiological processes to produce these effects?
Yeah.
You know, I'd love to translate this book, but I want to see how the Elusive Force is going to sell. You know how long it takes to translate and what effort it takes? Oh, my Lord.
I imagine that you're not just like, you know, when we talk about translating, Google Translate and that stuff, you are doing the background research.
No, I'm talking about a reputable, accurate, readable translation, you know.
Somebody with decades of experience in the State Department kind of translation.
Yeah. And you're doing the background of the culture at the time, learning everything about this, you know, so that when they say a singular word, you know, that like it could be, I don't know, for us it could be just some stupid word like no cap, you know, like that that word means a specific thing to the specific time, instead of like, oh, why is that person not wearing a hat? You know, like your language is instructed by the culture and the time, instead of Google Translate where it's like, why is this person not wearing a hat? I don't know. It's just, it doesn't make sense. You know, you have the whole background of it that makes more sense than if somebody came into it not understanding the complete picture.
Well, humans still have a place in the field of translation. You know, we're not
100%.
Completely obsolete yet, but there may come a time, who knows, but for the time being, we're still necessary.
Yep.
So you met these two immigrants.
Yes.
And that's how you got the original copy.
Well, the Polish copy, the Polish text of the Elusive Force. Yeah.
How close does this version which was just published at the end of 2023, right?
June of, actually exactly a year ago.
Oh, perfect.
End of June.
There we go.
2023. Yeah. Exactly. 1 year.
My apologies.
It's okay.
So end of June 2023. how close does this version come to the original?
Well, the editor thought it advisable to streamline the book, to remove parts that he thought were extraneous, that would not be of interest to the English language public. So I can understand his logic. Remember, the book was written for a Polish audience back in 1986. Mostly it was written around 1986. So the editor made a judicious decision to pare down parts that were not relevant 40 years later. I mean, I wasn't always in agreement with him, but that's okay. He has a prerogative as an editor to make his own choices, so I honored that,
That makes sense.
So in agreement with the surviving author, Anna, her husband, Marek, died 2019. So Anna and the publisher, Patrick, came to an agreement on which parts to retain and which to delete.
Okay.
So does that answer your question?
It does.
Some parts were eliminated.
Yeah. Y'all effectively targeted me because everything your editor said about cut this out because Americans won't like it. I hate to admit it, but he was right. So were there any parts, because you were handling the translation portion meticulously and with skill, were there any parts that were kind of left on the editing room floor, so to speak, right?
Well, the first chapter was an introduction discussing cases of anomalies throughout history, like, the one I mentioned about X-rays, meteors in France, which were, in Europe, which weren't accepted as real until the 18th century. I mean, there are lots of examples. So the editor thought the first chapter, which introduction to the subject of paranormal phenomena, he thought that was kind of superfluous. So that was the main part that was cut out. He thought it would be wiser to jump in directly, start with the event in Easter of 1983, what happened in Sosnowiec, the very first chapter, the outbreak of the bizarre events.
Yeah.
So, that was the main part that was cut out of the book.
Okay. So what, as somebody who spent months kind of toiling over translating those portions that got cut out, what are the cliff notes? What's standing out to you decades later from those portions that were cut out that you were like, well, this was the main kind of like gist, the main point of it around those meteors and around things like that?
I really have to strain my memory.
Oh, don't do that.
There were snippets cut out from individual chapters. Certain parts were rearranged to make them more, how should I say it, more dynamic.
Give better chemistry.
I'd say, I'd go back to the first chapter. I myself would have included that because I think it gave a historical context that might have proved helpful to a person unfamiliar with the poltergeist phenomenon. I mean, it wasn't essential, but I thought it was helpful.
Gotcha. Yeah.
I don't know if that answers your question, but
no, that's fine. Now, so you met Joasia at 2 times.
Twice, yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Would you mind walking us through that? It doesn't have to be, perfect or this or that, but like, how do you remember that looking back now? What was that like?
Nothing extraordinary happened, except the spoon bending that I mentioned.
Yeah.
She was a very pleasant young lady of 19 at the time. I met her parents. By the way, they're now deceased, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But just an ordinary working class family. I went with the co-authors and a physicist named Joasia Gajewski, who was familiar with the case. We drove down from Warsaw, and they lived in very modest circumstances. The apartment was small, typical Polish apartment in 1980s, like Soviet-era construction building. Nothing fancy, just basic working-class environment.
Yeah.
I can't remember anything particular. We weren't, involved in a long-winded scientific discussion. The authors just wanted me to meet Joasia and her family, and I spent a pleasant afternoon with them in October of '89 1989 and in the summer of 1990. And as I mentioned, on each occasion, Joasia bent steel teaspoon for me as a souvenir. Other than that, I can't remember anything in particular that would be worthy of special attention, you know?
Well, how did it impact you as someone who had, at that point, spent multiple years kind of looking, so, you know, the lead up to the drive to actually wanting to go to a modest Polish working class home, to take that long trek out there and to spend an evening with them? How did that impact you?
Well, I mean, I was fascinated by the case.
Yeah.
I was fascinated by the case. I had long been interested in certain paranormal subjects.
Okay.
I mentioned shamanism.
Yeah.
Time slips are a particular subject of interest to me.
Okay.
Reincarnation, Edgar Casey's trance states and readings,
Mm-hmm.
UFOs. So it's not as if I were completely unfamiliar with such subjects. But this case in particular showed me a certain aspect of reality with which I wasn't particularly familiar.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Poltergeist. You know, I'd never read widely on the subject, so what led me to go there? Curiosity.
Good answer.
Just curiosity. Nothing beyond that. You know, I wanted to meet the subject of the book that I spent 9 months translating.
That is the fairest, most honest answer, and I gotta be honest, that is the most relatable thing you could have said. If you were like, well, and you just went into some long philosophical thing, I would have been like, okay, that's really cool. But in honesty, it's just kind of like, hey man, you want to go meet her? Be like, hell yeah, let's go. Like, you know, like, I totally understand.
Yeah.
Curiosity is the bedrock of science. Without curiosity, there would be no progress. We just stew in our own inertia and apathy, like, you know, sponges, you know, on the seafloor. It's curiosity that provides the spark. What makes the world work? What makes man tick? You know?
Yeah.
I think curiosity is the most wonderful thing you could have.
Yeah. I 100% agree.
Without it, you're spiritually and emotionally and eventually physically dead.
Yeah. And, you know, they always say, let's just keep going off the rails here, because hell yeah. You know, you're only as old as you think you are, right? And it's that youthful curiosity that, well, keeps you youthful, right? You know, of just being enjoying and just digging in and just having fun and become obsessed with the things that fascinate you, as long as either A, they're inanimate, or B, they consent. That's what I say. Well, Joel, I hope we did our part to encourage all of the listeners of the show to go out and buy this goddamn book, because I don't know if we've made it clear enough. You seriously should. If you've made it this far in the episode and it's not in your Amazon wish list, I'm assuming you don't have Wi-Fi. That's all I'm gonna say. I hope that you're adding it now. Joel, is there any pluggables? Are there any things you'd like to give shout outs to? Where is the best place? Let me put it this way. Where's the best place financially, or just because, that people should order the book so that the authors, everybody, contributors, you yourself, get the most amount of compensation?
You just go to Google or some other search engine and type in the Elusive Force, Poltergeist. You'll find numerous websites that describe the subject of the book in various languages.
Okay.
And before you order, you may want to read some of the book reviews. If anyone eventually decides to read the book, it's easily available through Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or in digital form through Kindle. And Gil and Joey, if any of your listeners wishes to contact me personally, you can give them my email. I'd be glad to share whatever insights and information I may have. I'm always glad to answer questions.
Would you like me to put your email in the show notes so that people can find it?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Oh,
Okay.
yes. Yes.
Awesome.
Yes, you can do that. I won't say it on because I'm not going to impose my own publicity.
No, please. This is Joel. This is
audience, but
Joel. This is your opportunity. We are quite literally asking you to impose your publicity right now. So please
Well,
plug away.
all right, Joel Deco Stern, JoelDecostern @gmail.com.
Awesome.
Now, you may ask, why in the world would I have Deco as my middle name?
Joel, why would you have Deco?
Well, it's not my middle name.
Oh.
I'm a passionate collector of Art Deco. My house is like a time capsule from the 1930s.
Okay.
So, speaking of time slips, I live in one.
I absolutely love it. Absolutely love it.
Yeah.
Joel, do you have a plan coming up for an audiobook? Because, I mean, we're speaking to a auditorially inclined audience.
Well, that's totally up to the publisher, Anomalist Books in Charlottesville, Virginia. If there's sufficient interest, I see no reason to rule that out. But that's not something I can decide on my own.
Gotcha.
By the way, I do strongly recommend their catalog
Okay.
to all listeners who are interested in paranormal. They have a wonderful online catalog with a wide range of subjects, UFOs, cryptids, anything dealing with the paranormal.
Okay.
So let me put in a plug for them.
Perfect. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I'll go up there and visit them because I'm going up soon to go visit my family. So I'll go up there and just knock on the door. Hey, how about that audiobook of that?
Well, look, if you want to send a message.
Joel, that is all. And I just really do want to emphasize this to all of our listeners, to our entire audience, right? Even if you're not going to get this book, right? If you know anybody that might be interested in it, trust me, they will fucking love it. Add it to their birthday shopping list, their Christmas list, whatever the hell. Add it. You know what? Actually, that's perfect. Add it to your Amazon Christmas list that you'll forget about for the next handful of months. And when it comes up that your Aunt Margaret, and you're like, what the hell do I get her? And be like, oh yeah, she loves this kind of stuff. You'd be like, boom, I got the perfect gift. Bam. The Elusive Force. Put it in your shopping list. If somebody is into this at all, I can tell you somebody, and y'all have listened to the show a million times now, we've never covered poltergeists. That is not a topic.
Really? This is the first time?
You are the first.
100%. The first time.
No
you are
kidding.
our first.
Really? Wow.
Aha. The surprise ending. But we've never covered poltergeists. But when I dug into this case, I started looking into it. I ordered a copy of the book. I was like, we need to cover this. That's how strong of a pull this actual book is. Y'all have listened to the show. You know how much we don't just constantly try to push books, even though we constantly reference them. There's a reason. That's all I'm going to say. So please help out a small publisher. Help out a collection of authors. Help out the translator that we have on the show right now, and longtime facilitator of this case, 34 years, literally the amount of time I've been alive. Okay, I can't stress that enough. He has been pushing this absolutely fantastic case. Help folks get these incredible stories out. That's all I'm going to say.
Gil, thank you for the kind recommendation.
Of course.
I hope we can reconnect sometime to cover other subjects of interest to everyone.
Oh, I've got your phone number now. I'm going to pester the heck out of you. No, I'm just kidding. But yes, we love you all, and we will see you all next week. Take care, and bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Take care. It makes me wonder how many other cases like this occur throughout the world that we never hear of because of language barriers, the wall of apathy surrounding, the paranormal. So many wasted opportunities.